The lights in the Galactic Council chamber flickered as the emergency signal broke. Through every communication channel at once, Captain Jake Morrison stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. He had been Earth's representative for 3 years now, and he knew this moment would come eventually. The massive holographic display in the center of the chamber showed a face that made several council members step back in fear. Ambassador Kira Veltar of the Zephyrian colonies appeared before them. Her usually calm, crystalline features now cracked with terror. Her people were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful farmers and scientists, never harming anyone. "Please, you must help us," Kira begged, her voice breaking. "The Devourers came from nowhere. They appeared in our system 5 days ago with ships the size of moons. We tried to communicate, tried to understand what they wanted." She paused, touching the side of her face where a deep crack ran down to her jaw. "They don't want to talk. They don't want our resources or our technology. They want everything. Every blade of grass, every drop of water, every living creature. They have machines that strip entire planets down to bedrock in hours." The council chamber, usually filled with the constant buzz of political discussion, fell completely silent. Morrison watched as representatives from dozens of species shifted uncomfortably. Everyone had heard whispers of the Devourers, but most thought they were just stories told to frighten children, Kira continued, her image flickering as explosions lit up the background behind her. 3 of our worlds are already gone, Kaplorfer 4 to be. Our agricultural center, that fed 12 systems, is now just a ball of dead rock. Kepler 4 to C, where our children learned to swim in the crystal lakes, has no water left at all. Council Chairman Dexali, a being that looked like a walking tree with tentacles instead of branches, moved forward slowly. His species, the Mordani, had ruled the council for 200 years because of their wisdom and patience. His tentacles were shaking with something Morrison had never seen before. Fear. "How many ships do they have?" Dexal asked, though his voice suggested he didn't want to hear the answer. "Our sensors counted at least 200 before they were destroyed," Kira replied. "But there could be more, much more. They move in perfect formation like they share one mind. Our defense fleet of 30 ships lasted exactly 4 minutes against them." A low murmur spread through the chamber. The Zephyrian defense fleet was small, but well equipped with council-approved weapons. For them to be wiped out so quickly meant the Devourers were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Morrison studied the faces around him. The bird-like Cathari were already backing toward the exits. The slug-like Venturi had pulled their soft bodies completely into their shells. Even the warrior race called the Grimtalk looked nervous, their usual aggressive posturing replaced by worried whispers. "What about the council fleet?" asked Representative Zoran from the insect-like hive-mind species. "Surely our combined forces can handle this threat." Dexali's tentacles drooped. Fleet Admiral Cordex reports that our nearest battle group is stationed in the Outer Rim, dealing with the pirate conflicts near the asteroid fields. Even at maximum speed, they cannot reach the Zephyrian system for 6 months. The chamber erupted in panicked voices. 6 months was far too long. At the rate Kira described, the Devourers would consume the remaining Zephyrian worlds in weeks, maybe days. Morrison had been waiting for this moment. He stepped forward, his boots clicking loudly on the metal floor. The sound cut through the noise like a knife, and everyone turned to look at him. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having only made contact 15 years ago. Most species still saw them as primitive newcomers. Earth's Deep Strike fleet could be there in 2 weeks. Morrison said simply. The chamber fell so quiet you could hear the air recycling systems humming in the walls. Morrison's words hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone knew humans had been building warships since joining the galactic community. But the council had always assumed it was just paranoid behavior from a young species. Ambassador Veltar's crystalline face turned toward Morrison with desperate hope. "You would help us, even though we barely know each other?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a weight that made several council members step back. "However, if we deploy, we operate under human protocols. No restrictions, no oversight from the council." The implications of those words sent a chill through the chamber. Admiral Tom Bradley sat in his command chair deep within the bridge of the Retribution, a ship so classified that most Earth governments didn't even know it existed. The message from Captain Morrison had arrived 3 hours ago, and Bradley had been staring at the authorization codes ever since. At 62 years old, he had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment, though he had always hoped it would never come. The Retribution floated silently in the darkness beyond Pluto, where the sun looked like just another bright star. This region of space, known as the Kuiper Belt, was officially empty, according to all galactic records. The truth was far different. Hidden here in the cold and dark were ships that represented humanity's deepest fears about what might be waiting for them among the stars. Bradley's weathered hands moved across, his command console entering the final authorization sequence. His face, marked by decades of military service and too many classified operations, showed no emotion. He had learned long ago that showing fear or excitement before a battle was the fastest way to get his people killed. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Zephyrian colonies," announced Commander Lisa Hayes from her station. Hayes was Bradley's second-in-command, a woman who had earned her position by surviving 3 separate alien contact scenarios that had gone badly wrong. Her voice carried the same calm professionalism that had kept both of them alive through situations the public would never hear about. Bradley nodded, and the main screen flickered to life. Ambassador Veltar appeared, looking even more desperate than she had during the council meeting. Behind her, Bradley could see the glow of fires and the shadows of people running in panic. "Admiral Bradley," she began, her voice shaking, "we are grateful beyond words that Earth has agreed to help us. However, I must ask. Our homeworld of Kepler-4 for 2D contains the sacred groves of memory, where we keep the living history of our people. These trees are over 10,000 years old and cannot be replaced. Please, can your forces ensure their protection?" Hayes glanced at Bradley, waiting for his response. The Admiral's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. He had dealt with requests like this before, always from people who didn't understand what war really meant. Bradley's laugh came out harsh and cold. Echoing through the bridge, "Commander Hayes, please inform the ambassador that we'll preserve what's left after we're done with the Devourers." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in silence. Hayes understood the message perfectly. In Bradley's experience, trying to fight a war while worrying about preserving buildings and trees was the fastest way to lose everything, including the people you were trying to protect. "Signal all units," Bradley commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been making life-and-death decisions since before most of his crew were born. "Begin Phase 1 emergence. All ships are to power up reactors and prepare for immediate deployment." The response was immediate. Throughout the Kuiper Belt, ships that had been drifting in cold sleep for years began to wake up. Lieutenant Mike Rodriguez, barely 25, but already a veteran of 2 classified missions, watched his sensor displays with growing amazement. "Sir, I'm reading power signatures from 47 major vessels," Rodriguez reported, his voice filled with awe. "The Devastator, the Nightfall, the Apocalypse, ... Ships I thought were just stories are actually out there." Bradley stood up from his command chair and walked to the main viewport. In the distance, he could see the running lights of massive ships becoming visible as they powered up their systems. These weren't the clean, elegant vessels that the galactic community was used to seeing. These were warships designed by a species that had learned the hard way that the universe was full of things that wanted to kill you. The hull of the Retribution itself told the story. Scars from energy weapons ran along its flanks, patches where armor had been welded over holes from asteroid impacts, and burn marks from battles that officially never happened. Every ship in the fleet carried similar marks, reminders of the conflicts Earth had fought while the galaxy preferred to pretend that war was a thing of the past. "The Council has no idea what they've just unleashed," Rodriguez whispered, still staring at his sensors. Bradley nodded grimly, his reflection visible. In the viewport, as more ships appeared in the darkness around them, they're about to learn why. Earth spent 3 centuries preparing for galactic war, while they played politics and held peace conferences. The Admiral returned to his chair, and opened a fleet-wide communication channel across 47 ships. Thousands of crew members who had been training for this moment their entire lives waited for his words. "This is Admiral Bradley to all units. We have our orders. Devourers think they're the apex predators in this galaxy. Time to show them what real predators look like." Space around Kepler 442 had been eerily quiet for the past hour. The Devourer fleet hung in perfect formation near the system's fourth planet, their biomechanical ships slowly consuming what had once been a thriving world. These alien vessels looked more like living creatures than traditional spacecraft. With organic hulls that pulsed with a sickly green light and tentacle-like appendages that reached down to strip mine entire continents, then reality tore open. The first ship to emerge from hyperspace was something the Devourers had never encountered before. The Devastator was a Nemesis-class dreadnought, and it was absolutely massive. At over 2 miles long, its dark hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ship's arrival created a gravitational disturbance that sent ripples through space itself, causing several smaller Devourer vessels to drift off course. Captain Dan Foster stood on the bridge of the Devastator, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the enemy fleet through the main viewport. Foster was a career military man who had spent 15 years fighting in conflicts that the public would never know about. His calm demeanor hid the fact that he was studying the enemy formation with the practiced eye of someone who had destroyed fleets before. "Sir, enemy vessels are changing course," reported Tactical Officer Amy Chen from her station. Shen was one of the best tactical analysts in the human fleet, capable of processing battle information faster than most computers. Her fingers danced across her console as data from the ship's sensors filled her screens. "I count 68 Devourer ships," Chen continued, her voice steady despite the overwhelming odds they faced. "They're moving to intercept us. Looks like they're trying to surround our position before the rest of our fleet arrives." Foster nodded, unsurprised. The Devourers had destroyed every fleet they had faced so far by using their superior numbers to overwhelm their enemies quickly. What they didn't know was that humans had been expecting this exact scenario for decades. "Let them come," Foster replied, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had planned for this moment his entire career. "Signal the fleet. All ships are to initiate Cerberus formation immediately." Throughout the Kepler 442 system, space began to shimmer as more human ships dropped out of hyperspace. But these weren't arriving in the neat, organized formations that most galactic militaries preferred. Instead, they seemed to appear randomly throughout the system, some near planets, others in empty space, creating what looked like complete chaos to outside observers. The Zephyrian survivors watching from their remaining colonies were confused by what they saw. Where were the battle lines? Why weren't the human ships grouping together for protection? It looked like Earth's fleet was scattered, vulnerable. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that they were watching something that had never been seen before in galactic warfare. The Cerberus formation wasn't based on the military tactics taught in galactic academies. It was based on something far older and more dangerous. The hunting patterns of apex predators, the Phantom-class carriers, Nightfall and Shadow's Edge, were the first to demonstrate why human ships were different. Captain Steve Miller watched from the bridge of the Nightfall as his ship engaged its stealth systems. The advanced cloaking technology developed in secret Earth laboratories made the massive carrier simply vanish from all sensors. "Stealth field at maximum," reported his navigation officer. "The Devourers have lost us completely." Miller smiled, the expression of someone who enjoyed his work a little too much. The Nightfall was carrying over 300 fighter craft, each one piloted by humans who had been training for interstellar combat since childhood. These weren't the ceremonial pilots that most galactic species use for parades and simple patrol duties. These were warriors bred for war. "Launch all fighters," Miller commanded. "Target their command vessels first. Cut off the head and the body dies." The fighter bay doors opened silently in the vacuum of space, and hundreds of small, deadly craft poured out like angry wasps from a disturbed nest. Each fighter was equipped with weapons that pushed the boundaries of what the galactic community considered acceptable for warfare. Meanwhile, At the edge of the system, the siege ships Apocalypse and Doomsday were preparing to demonstrate why. Earth had spent so much time and resources developing weapons that could crack planets. These ships were designed for one purpose: to destroy things that were too big or too deep, well defended for conventional weapons to handle. The energy readings from these ships as they charged their main weapons sent alarm signals through every devourer vessel in the system. The aliens had never encountered weapons that could generate this much raw power. Their biomechanical ships began to retreat instinctively, sensing a level of destructive capability that threatened their very existence. Captain Foster watched the enemy's reaction with professional satisfaction. "They're starting to understand," he murmured to Chen. "They came here expecting to hunt sheep. Instead, they found wolves." The Zephyrian observers could only watch in growing horror and fascination as Earth's so-called defensive fleet revealed its true nature. These weren't the polished, ceremonial vessels that most species sent to galactic gatherings. These were warships designed by a species that had learned to survive by being more dangerous than anything. It wanted to kill them. As the human fleet completed its deployment throughout the system, the Devourers found themselves facing something they had never encountered before: prey that had become predators. The moment the first human fighter opened fire, the entire nature of the battle changed. What the Devourers had expected to be another easy hunt turned into something they had never experienced before. They became the hunted. Commander Rachel Barnes sat in the Tactical Command Center aboard the Retribution, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of every ship in both fleets. Barnes had coordinated dozens of classified operations over her 15-year career, but nothing had prepared her for managing a battle of this scale. Her voice remained perfectly calm as she directed the most devastating military force humanity had ever assembled. "Phoenix Squadron, eliminate their rear guard," she commanded into her headset. "Dragon Wing, begin harassment runs on their flanks. Raptor Group, you're free to engage targets of opportunity." The Devourer fleet had arranged itself in the same formation that had worked against every other species they had encountered. Their largest ships formed a central core, protected by layers of smaller vessels that could intercept incoming attacks. It was a defensive strategy that relied on their enemies attacking directly, following the honorable rules of engagement that most galactic civilizations respected. Humans had never read those rules. The first wave of human fighters came from above, and below the galactic plane, angles that most species never thought to defend because space combat traditionally happened on a flat battlefield. The Devourer's sensors detected the incoming fighters, but their weapons couldn't turn fast enough to target ships moving in 3 dimensions. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Tony Ramirez led Phoenix Squadron in the first attack run, his fighters screaming through space at speeds that would have been impossible without the advanced inertial dampeners human engineers had developed. His target was a Devourer cruiser positioned at the rear of their formation, supposedly safe from attack. "Phoenix leader to all units," Ramirez called over the squadron channel. "These things are big and slow. Hit them hard and get out before their friends can respond." The human fighters struck with surgical precision, instead of the massive energy blasts that most species used. Human weapons fired concentrated beams that could cut through armor like a knife through paper. The Devourer cruiser's hull split open in 3 places before its crew even realized they were under attack. But the real terror began when the stealth ships revealed themselves. Captain Steve Miller's Nightfall had been moving silently through the Devourer formation for 10 minutes, completely invisible to their sensors. When Miller gave the order to decloak, his carrier appeared less than a mile from the enemy flagship, close enough that the Devourers could see individual weapon ports along the ship's hull. "Batteries, fire at will," Miller commanded. The Nightfall unleashed a barrage that lit up space like a miniature star. Energy weapons that had been charging for the entire approach fired simultaneously, overwhelming the Devourer flagship's shields in seconds. The alien vessel, which had seemed so massive and intimidating just moments before, began to break apart under the concentrated assault. The psychological impact was immediate. The Devourers had built their entire military strategy around fear, an overwhelming force. They were used to their enemies running in terror or dying quickly in hopeless last stands. They had never faced an enemy that was more terrifying than they were. Captain John Parker commanded the Reaper-class ship Harbinger, a vessel that carried weapons the galactic community had banned decades ago as crimes against sentience. Parker was one of the few humans who had actually volunteered for this assignment, knowing full well what it meant.
Ow.
Deploy the energy vampires, Parker ordered his weapons officer. Target their power cores. The energy vampires were weapons that most civilized species considered too cruel to use. They were designed to drain the power from enemy ships slowly, leaving their crews trapped in cold, dark vessels with no life support. The Galactic Council had banned them after witnessing what they could do during humanity's early conflicts. Parker didn't care about the ban. His orders were to eliminate the Devourer threat, and he intended to follow those orders completely. The nanite swarms came next. These microscopic robots were programmed to consume specific materials, in this case, the biomechanical hulls of Devourer ships. They spread across enemy vessels like a plague, eating through armor and support structures until entire ships simply fell apart. But perhaps the most disturbing weapon in Parker's arsenal was the psychological warfare broadcast system. Human scientists had studied the brain patterns of dozens of alien species, learning exactly what frequencies and patterns could drive different types of minds to madness. The broadcasts that poured from the Harbinger were designed specifically to affect the Devourer species' neural networks. Communications. Officer Kelly Wright watched her displays as panicked transmissions poured in from the enemy fleet. "Sir, I'm receiving multiple surrender requests from Devourer vessels. Their flagship is asking for terms." The transmission was patched through to Admiral Bradley aboard the Retribution. The Devourer commander appeared on screen, its biomechanical features twisted with something that might have been fear. "Human fleet, we yield." The alien spoke through its translation device. "We offer surrender according to galactic conventions. Please cease your attack." Bradley's response was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every ship in both fleets could hear it clearly. "Surrender is for prey," he said, his voice carrying the cold finality of a death sentence. "You came here as predators. You consumed entire worlds. You showed no mercy to the innocent." The transmission cut off, and the human assault continued. 17 minutes after the first shot was fired, the battle was over. Not a single Devourer ship remained functional. Most had been completely destroyed, while the few survivors drifted powerless in space. Their crews either dead or driven insane by weapons that violated every rule of civilized warfare. The galaxy would never be the same. The silence that followed the battle was more terrifying than the fighting itself had been. Ambassador Kira Veltar stood on the observation platform of her homeworld's capital city, staring up at the stars, where moments before, 68 Devourer ships had been preparing to consume her planet. Now there was nothing but empty space and the slowly fading energy. Signatures of weapons that should never have existed. Her aide, a young Zephyrian named Kerwin, stood beside her with his crystalline features pale with shock. He had watched the entire battle through the colony's defense network sensors, seeing things that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. Ambassador Corwin whispered, his voice barely audible above the celebration sounds coming from the city below. "The human ships, what they did to the Devers, ... Veltar nodded slowly, unable to take her eyes off the massive human vessels that were now preparing to leave. The human fleet hung in space like dark angels, their scarred hulls catching the light from Kepler 442's sun. These ships had just performed what could only be described as a miracle, saving her people from certain extinction. But the methods they had used, they didn't just defeat the Devourers, she whispered, more to herself than to her aide. They erased them, completely. There's nothing left but space dust and radiation. The scope of what had happened was still sinking in. The Devourers had been consuming worlds for decades, building an empire of death across the outer rim of the galaxy. Fleet after fleet had tried to stop them, all failing against their overwhelming numbers and biomechanical technology. The greatest military minds in the galactic community had studied the Devourer threat and concluded that stopping them would require a coordinated effort from dozens of species over many years. The humans had done it. In 17 minutes, Admiral. Bradley's voice suddenly crackled through the communication system, his final transmission to the Galactic Council being broadcast on all frequencies. His words were measured and professional. There was something underneath them that made Veltar's crystalline skin crawl with unease. "The threat has been eliminated," Bradley reported, in the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "Earth's Deep Strike Fleet is returning to standby status. We trust this demonstration clarifies why humanity maintains what the Council considers excessive military preparations." The transmission ended with a click that seemed to echo through the empty space where an entire enemy fleet had existed just minutes before. Veltar realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to exhale. The casual way Bradley had delivered his report was somehow more disturbing than watching his ships tear through the Devourers like they were made of paper. Far away on Nexus Prime, Captain Jake Morrison stood in the Galactic Council chambers watching the aftermath of humanity's first major military action since joining the galactic community. The massive chamber that had been filled with panic and desperation just days before was now buzzing with a different kind of energy. Fear, confusion, and a growing realization that everything they thought they knew about humans had been wrong. Representatives from dozens of species huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. The elegant bird-like Cathari looked ready to flee the building entirely. The usually aggressive Grimtalk warriors were studying Morrison with something that looked suspiciously like respect mixed with terror. Chairman Dexali approached Morrison, slowly, his tentacles moving in patterns that Morrison recognized as deep anxiety among his species. The ancient being who had ruled the council with wisdom and patience for 2 centuries now looked like he had aged decades in the past few hours. Captain Morrison Dexal began, then stopped, clearly struggling with how to continue. "Your species. Those weapons your ships used. ... Those tactics." Morrison's expression remained completely neutral, the same calm mask he had worn throughout his years as Earth's representative. Inside, he was calculating how this moment would affect humanity's future relationship with the galactic community. The cat was out of the bag now. There would be no going back to the careful diplomatic dance they had been performing for the past 15 years. "We're the descendants of apex predators, Chairman," Morrison replied simply. "We didn't reach the top of our food chain by being merciful to threats that wanted to destroy us." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Several council members who had been moving closer to hear the conversation suddenly stepped back. Morrison noticed the reactions and filed them away for future reference. These beings had spent their entire lives believing that civilization meant the absence of real violence, that threats could be handled through negotiation and compromise. They had just learned that humanity of us saw things very differently, as news of the battle spread through galactic communication networks. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had barely acknowledged Earth's existence suddenly wanted detailed information about human military capabilities. Trade requests poured in from governments that had previously ignored humanity's diplomatic overtures. Fear, it seemed, was an excellent motivator for respect. But perhaps more importantly, the galaxy was beginning to understand something that humans had known for centuries. Earth's isolation from galactic politics hadn't been about protecting other species from humanity's primitive violence. It had been about protecting humanity from being forced to reveal just how dangerous they really were. The humans were content to remain in the shadows of galactic politics, happy to be underestimated and ignored. But now everyone knew the truth, that Captain Morrison had tried so hard to keep hidden. When the real monsters came calling, Earth would always send something worse. The age of galactic innocence was over, and humanity's long isolation had finally come to an end.